The sirens pierced the night at a massive industrial site in Georgia. Hundreds of workers were marched outside, faces stunned, clutching ID cards that suddenly meant nothing. In just a few hours, U.S. authorities turned a $5.5 billion investment project into the epicenter of a political storm. This was not a small facility, but the Hyundai LG EV battery plant, a flagship of Korean technology and a symbol of trans-Pacific cooperation. Yet on September 4th, it became the stage for the largest immigration raid in U.S. history. 475 workers arrested, nearly 300 of them South Korean nationals. In Seoul, shock spread like a lightning strike. A strategic ally, a technological partner dragged into America's immigration crackdown. Washington's message was blunt: these workers entered on tourist visas and then stayed to work illegally. Donald Trump wasted no time stepping before cameras, turning the incident into a global warning: every foreign company must respect U.S. immigration law or pay the price. But this story is not just about U.S.-Korea tensions. It reveals a deeper paradox. America desperately needs skilled labor for electric vehicles, semiconductors, and clean tech, yet it is slamming the very doors it relies upon. And from far across the Atlantic, another voice echoes a very different path. Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso, has chosen self-reliance over dependence. Instead of waiting for foreign corporations to dictate terms, he nationalizes resources, trains young citizens, and builds from within to ensure that his nation can never be held hostage by outside powers. So here lies the question: when even global giants like Hyundai can be humbled overnight, what is the safer road for smaller nations? Is Traoré's strategy of sovereignty and self-reliance the answer? Please share if you feel that you are one of the first to know about and support President Ibrahim Traoré. Subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines. On the morning of September 4th, an operation unlike anything in U.S. immigration history unfolded in Bryan County, Georgia. The sprawling Hyundai LG electric vehicle battery plant, part of a $5.5 billion investment project hailed as one of America's largest clean tech facilities, suddenly became the target of a surprise raid. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE), working alongside Homeland Security investigations, stormed the site with a scale and precision that left even seasoned observers stunned. Within hours, 475 workers were detained, the single largest mass arrest at a single worksite in American history. Of those, nearly 300 were South Korean nationals, the very people sent by Hyundai to support one of Washington's most prized industrial sectors. The rest of the detained included workers from Latin America and Asia, all accused of working without proper employment permits. The allegations painted a troubling picture. Many of these workers reportedly entered the United States on tourist or short-term business visas, only to take up permanent roles at the battery plant. Legally, to work in the U.S., one must hold a valid employment visa or a work permit. But according to investigators, subcontractors and contractors knowingly circumvented immigration laws to fill urgent labor gaps. The facility demanded highly skilled technician specialists in advanced battery chemistry assembly lines and chip-related manufacturing, a labor pool that the American workforce itself could not fully supply. Here lies the paradox. For years, successive administrations in Washington knew about these practices. The Biden administration, like those before it, often looked the other way. The logic was simple: if the government cracked down too hard, it would cripple America's own industrial ambitions. The clean energy transition, the semiconductor race, the drive for electric vehicles, all required expertise that the U.S. could not produce overnight. In many cases, authorities tolerated the presence of foreign specialists, even if their paperwork was questionable, because the alternative would have been stalled projects and billions in losses. But September 4th marked a dramatic break with that unspoken compromise. Under Donald Trump's revived America First approach, enforcement became spectacle. The raid was not just about labor law, it was a political theater designed to send a message. Trump and his allies wanted to demonstrate that no corporation, no matter how prestigious, was above U.S. immigration rules. The fact that Hyundai was one of South Korea's crown jewels only heightened the drama. The sheer size of the operation also sent ripples beyond Georgia. For South Korea, it was a humiliation. Hyundai, Samsung, and LG are not just companies, they are national champion, symbols of Korea's global stature. To see hundreds of their citizens detained, marched out of a plant in handcuffs, ignited outrage and alarm in Seoul. South Korea's government immediately lodged protests demanding explanations while scrambling to arrange emergency diplomatic channels with Washington. At the heart of the matter was not only legality, but trust. The United States has actively courted South Korean investment in recent years, urging companies to build factories on U.S. soil to reduce dependence on Chinese supply chains. Tens of billions of dollars in contracts and construction projects were already underway across multiple states. And yet in one sweep, Washington had sown seeds of doubt. Were South Korean corporations truly welcome partners, or just pawns to be disciplined when convenient? The raid, in its scale and symbolism, became more than a question of immigration paperwork. It exposed the fragility of alliances built on economic convenience. It showed how, in pursuit of domestic political theater, Washington was willing to jeopardize the very partnerships it claimed to value. And it underscored the deep contradiction at the heart of U.S. industrial policy, needing foreign talent, yet punishing the very presence of that talent. This is where the comparison to other leaders becomes striking. In Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré has built his agenda on avoiding exactly this trap. Rather than allowing foreign corporations to dictate terms or relying on outside labor, he champions self-reliance, training local youth to fill vital roles and nationalizing industries so that no foreign raid can threaten his country's sovereignty. In Georgia, the Hyundai raid was a reminder of how even the mightiest corporations can be humbled overnight. In Ouagadougou, Traoré's strategy represents an effort to ensure that Burkina Faso will never face such vulnerability. The real drama began not with the arrests themselves, but with the aftermath. As news broke that 300 South Korean nationals had been detained in Georgia, the reaction in Seoul was immediate and visceral. Television screens replayed the images of workers led away by U.S. authorities, their uniforms stripped of dignity, their futures uncertain. For a country that prided itself on global partnerships, this was more than an incident. It was a national embarrassment. South Korea's government wasted no time. The foreign ministry issued urgent statements of regret, demanding clarity from Washington. Behind closed doors, diplomats scrambled to open emergency lines with U.S. officials pressing for explanations and seeking assurances that bilateral relations were not being sacrificed at the altar of American political theater. Within days, a compromise emerged. South Korean workers would be repatriated through chartered flights, easing tensions but not erasing the humiliation. At the center of the storm stood Donald Trump. Never one to let a crisis pass without capitalizing on it, he took to the stage. His message was sharp, almost theatrical. Foreign companies must respect U.S. immigration laws. No exceptions. Not for Hyundai, not for LG, not for anyone. The warning was global, a shot across the bow of every multinational corporation from Toyota in Japan to TSMC in Taiwan. Bring your experts legally, he declared, or don't bring them at all. And yet, even as he thundered against violations, Trump acknowledged America's quiet dependency. He admitted what many in Washington have whispered for years: the United States needs foreign specialists. The EV industry, semiconductor fabrication, advanced manufacturing, these sectors are short of skilled American workers. Without outside expertise, America's industrial revival is little more than a slogan. Herein lay the paradox. Trump demanded foreign companies train U.S. citizens, reducing dependency on overseas talent while simultaneously threatening mass arrests that would deepen the labor shortage. It was a political balancing act that risked collapsing under its own contradictions. The Hyundai raid, intended to project strength, revealed just how fragile America's position really was. For South Korea, the raid forced an uncomfortable reckoning. Hyundai, Samsung, and LG had poured tens of billions into U.S. soil, lured by promises of stability and partnership. But the raid suggested that investment could not insulate them from politics. Business leaders in Seoul began to ask hard questions. Could they truly trust the U.S. as a reliable host? Would their engineers and specialists forever work under the shadow of immigration raids? The climax of the incident was not just the handcuffs, but the erosion of trust. Washington wanted Korean money and technology, but also wanted to display toughness at home. Seoul wanted partnership, but found itself embarrassed on the global stage. The alliance that had seemed so unshakable suddenly felt vulnerable. This was also where the story rippled far beyond the Pacific. Across Asia, companies in Japan, Taiwan, and even China watched closely. If Hyundai could be raided, so could they. If hundreds of South Koreans could be detained overnight, so could their citizens. Trump's message was unmistakable. America's rules come first, partners second. And yet from Africa, a contrasting voice emerged. Ibrahim Traoré. The transitional president of Burkina Faso has consistently warned against over-reliance on foreign corporations. His philosophy is rooted in sovereignty, train local youth, build industries with national labor, and nationalize key resources, so no foreign government can destabilize the nation with a single raid. Where Hyundai found itself vulnerable in Georgia, Traore insists Burkina Faso must never be. His approach may lack the billions of foreign investment seen in Korea, but it builds resilience that cannot be so easily undermined. The Hyundai raid thus became more than a U.S.-Korea drama. It was a global lesson in dependency, power, and politics. The climax revealed the limits of alliances, the fragility of trust, and the price of relying too heavily on external forces. For America, it was a chance to showcase law and order. For South Korea, it was a humiliation. And for leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, it was validation. The surest defense against such crises is self-reliance. The dust had barely settled in Georgia when the ripple effects of the Hyundai raid began to surface, not only in boardrooms, but in the homes of ordinary families. For the detained workers, many of whom had traveled thousands of miles under the promise of stable employment, the consequences were immediate and deeply personal. Overnight breadwinners became detainees. Some faced deportation, others the stigma of being branded as lawbreakers. Families in South Korea waited anxiously for news, while relatives in the U.S. feared the knock at the door. In the United States, the raid exposed a painful contradiction. On the one hand, it was framed as a victory for law and order, a dramatic enforcement of immigration rules. On the other hand, it risked paralyzing a key sector of the American economy. The EV battery plant was not a side project. It was central to Washington's industrial strategy to reduce reliance on Chinese supply chains. By removing hundreds of skilled workers overnight, the raid created uncertainty over production timelines and raised questions about whether America could realistically achieve its ambitious energy transition goals. For local communities in Georgia, the fallout was also palpable. The plant had promised jobs, investment, and growth. Now it symbolized disruption, tension, and political grandstanding. For South Korea, the consequences were even more acute. The images of its citizens in handcuffs triggered public outrage and deepened mistrust toward Washington. Korean newspapers and commentators questioned whether the U.S. truly valued the partnership or whether its leaders were willing to sacrifice allies for domestic political gain. Business leaders worried about reputational damage. Would young engineers still volunteer to relocate to U.S. factories, knowing they might be treated as criminals? Diplomatic officials worked overtime to contain the anger, but the wound was visible. Politically, the raid strengthened Donald Trump's hand at home. To his supporters, it showcased a president willing to enforce rules with no exceptions, no matter how powerful the company. To his critics, it revealed recklessness, a willingness to jeopardize strategic alliances for the sake of headlines. Either way, the raid ensured that immigration and foreign investment became central issues in America's political discourse once again. But the deeper consequence was the erosion of trust in globalization itself. Multinational corporations operate on the assumption that investment and expertise will be protected, that governments will prioritize stability over disruption. The Hyundai raid shattered that assumption. It signaled that even billion-dollar projects could be held hostage to political wins. The chilling effect spread quickly. Investors reconsidered risk, governments re-examined exposure, and corporate leaders quietly began diversifying strategies. It is in this moment that the contrast with Africa becomes sharp. In Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré has built his political legitimacy on the promise of protecting his citizens from precisely this kind of vulnerability. His decision to nationalize industries, train young people domestically, and reduce dependence on foreign firms stems from a recognition when you rely too heavily on outsiders, your sovereignty is always at risk. Where South Korean engineers found themselves in handcuffs in Georgia, Traoré insists that Burkinabe youth must be the ones holding the tools, building the factories, and charting their nation's future. The civil and political consequences of the Hyundai raid then extend far beyond America's borders. They are a cautionary tale for any nation that places its trust entirely in foreign partnerships. For the U.S., the raid may have been a demonstration of strength. For South Korea, it was a bitter humiliation. And for Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré, it was confirmation that sovereignty cannot be outsourced, it must be built from within, even if the road is longer and harder. From Washington's vantage point, the Hyundai raid was intended as a show of power, a clear reminder that America's laws reign supreme on its soil. For Donald Trump, it was an opportunity to revive the America First narrative, one that promised ordinary citizens that no foreign company, no matter how powerful, would be allowed to bypass the rules. In the short term, this message resonated with his political base. Immigration enforcement is a potent symbol in American politics, and the sight of hundreds of foreign workers in custody reinforced Trump's reputation as a leader willing to act decisively. But beneath the surface, the raid exposed America's vulnerabilities. The United States cannot meet its industrial ambitions without foreign expertise. Electric vehicles, semiconductors, and advanced manufacturing require skills that are in short supply domestically. By cracking down so aggressively, Washington risks undermining the very industries it is trying to protect. This paradox is not lost on policymakers who now face the challenge of balancing national pride with practical necessity. Globally, the raid sent shockwaves far beyond the U.S.-Korea relationship. In Japan, corporate leaders quietly questioned whether their own factories could face similar raids. In Taiwan, TSMC executives considered whether America was as reliable a partner as once believed. Even in Europe, where companies like Volkswagen are expanding EV production in the U.S., concerns grew about compliance risks and political unpredictability. The message was clear: America welcomes investment, but only on its terms, and those terms can shift overnight. For South Korea, the consequences went beyond economics. The raid highlighted the precarious nature of its alliance with Washington. On the one hand, Korea is indispensable to U.S. industrial strategy. On the other, it is vulnerable to U.S. domestic politics. The arrests raised uncomfortable questions about sovereignty and dignity. Could Seoul continue to trust an ally that embarrassed it so publicly? Could Korean corporations remain confident that their investments would be protected? The broader world read the incident as a lesson in dependency. It revealed how fragile global supply chains become when concentrated in one country, and how political agendas can disrupt billions of dollars in investment. For developing nations, it was a warning: relying too heavily on foreign partnerships can leave your citizens and industries exposed to forces beyond your control. And here, once again, Ibrahim Traoré's example stands in sharp contrast. In Burkina Faso, he has consistently argued that sovereignty must come before globalization. Rather than allowing foreign corporations to dominate, he emphasizes training local workers, nationalizing key industries, and building resilience from within. The Hyundai raid proved his point on a global stage. Even powerful nations like South Korea can find their workers humiliated abroad, while a strategy rooted in self-reliance shields nations from such vulnerability. From the perspective of the United States, the raid was both victory and risk. From the perspective of South Korea, it was humiliation and doubt. But from the perspective of the wider world, it was a cautionary tale, and for leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, it was validation. In the contest between dependency and sovereignty, the stakes could not be clearer. The raid on Hyundai's billion-dollar facility in Georgia will be remembered not just for the images of hundreds of workers in handcuffs, but for the deeper truth. It revealed even the largest corporations and the strongest alliances can be shaken overnight by the weight of politics. For America, it was a demonstration of force, but also a reminder of its dependency. For South Korea, it was a humiliation that exposed the fragility of trust. And for the rest of the world, it was a warning that no partnership, no investment is immune from sudden disruption. This is where the contrast with Africa becomes more than symbolic. In Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré has built his movement on the belief that sovereignty is not negotiable. His government's policies, from nationalizing gold to training the nation's youth in critical industries, are not just about economics. They are about protection from precisely the kind of vulnerability that Hyundai faced in the United States. Traoré's message is simple but profound. A nation that relies on others to train its workers, build its factories, or enforce its rules will never truly be free. The Hyundai raid is not only a U.S.-Korea story, it is a global mirror. It reflects the dangers of dependency, the volatility of global politics, and the cost of forgetting that true power comes from within. If South Korea, with all its wealth and technology, can be placed on its knees in a single raid, what about smaller nations? And if even America cannot balance its hunger for foreign expertise with its desire for control, what lessons should the rest of us take? So we ask you, do you think President Ibrahim Traoré's national reform strategies are effective enough to protect Burkina Faso from similar vulnerabilities? Can the world continue to trust in traditional alliances, or is it time to support a new model of sovereignty and self-reliance? Please share if you feel that you are one of the first to know about and support President Ibrahim Traoré. Traore. Subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines. The Hyundai raid may fade from headlines, but its lessons should not. Dependency is dangerous, alliances are fragile, and sovereignty is priceless.